After the fall of the Han Dynasty in 220 CE, China entered a prolonged period of political fragmentation and social upheaval. The central imperial authority, which had maintained relative stability and bureaucratic coherence for over 4 centuries, collapsed under the combined pressures of court corruption, peasant revolts, and regional military rebellions. In the absence of a unifying emperor, the territory of the former Han realm divided into competing polities, beginning with the Three Kingdoms period of Wei, Shu, and Wu. Each of these states attempted to assert dominance through military campaigns and strategic alliances, but none achieved lasting consolidation. Historians observe that during this era, authority became highly localized, with regional generals exercising near-autonomous control over their territories. Such decentralization, while destabilizing, also laid the groundwork for experimentation in governance, administration, and military organization that later dynasties would draw upon. The subsequent Jin Dynasty, which nominally reunified parts of northern and southern China by 280 CE, faced continuous challenges from both internal rebellion and external pressure. The era of the 16 Kingdoms, particularly in the north, was defined by frequent incursions by non-Han steppe groups, including the Xiongnu, Xinbei, Jie, Di, and Chang. These groups established short-lived kingdoms and principalities, often adopting elements of Chinese administrative systems while retaining distinct cultural and military practices. Archaeological evidence indicates significant population movements during this period, as families and communities sought safety from warfare, famine, and banditry. Northern China experienced repeated waves of displacement, while southern China along the Yangtze River developed more stable economic centers. Cities such as Jiankang emerged as regional hubs for administration, trade, and culture, creating a bifurcated civilization in which North and South operated under distinct political and social logics. Amid this fragmentation, the concept of centralized governance remained influential. Scholars and officials who had served under the Han continued to transmit administrative knowledge, Confucian ideals, and legal codification, even to rulers of short-lived northern kingdoms. These surviving intellectual and bureaucratic traditions contributed to a continuity of Chinese governance that the later Sui and Tang dynasties would capitalize upon. By the late 6th century, the Sui dynasty emerged under Emperor Wan, who systematically pursued reunification after decades of regional division. Sui leadership combined pragmatic military strategy with bureaucratic rigor. Emperor Wan codified laws that drew upon Han precedents, streamlined taxation, and appointed officials to ensure oversight over both provincial and local affairs. These measures reinforced the principle that effective governance depended on standardized procedures, centralized record-keeping, and controlled communication channels between the capital and the peripheries. One of the Sui's most ambitious projects, the construction of the Grand Canal, exemplifies the scale and sophistication of infrastructure planning achieved during this era. The canal connected the fertile southern rice-growing regions with the northern political centers, facilitating both tax collection and troop movement. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that labor for such projects relied on carefully organized conscription, rationing, and logistical planning, providing the Tang with a model of state-directed infrastructure that could integrate regional economies. Furthermore, Emperor Wen's policy of codifying laws into systematic codes ensured a measure of consistency across his reunited empire, reducing the administrative discretion that had contributed to the instability of previous centuries. These developments reinforced the centrality of the imperial state as an arbiter of both legal and economic authority, while demonstrating the potential for large-scale projects to bind geographically disparate regions together. Northern frontier zones, long subject to incursions and semi-independent warlords, were brought under a form of regulated military administration. The Sui employed regional garrisons and strategically placed military governors to oversee sensitive borderlands, balancing coercion with incentives to local elites. These governors exercised considerable autonomy, but were subordinated to central directives, demonstrating an early model for managing ethnically diverse and geographically distant territories. In southern China, trade, agriculture, and urban development continued relatively undisturbed, enabling the Sui to extract surplus goods and manpower while maintaining political cohesion. This combination of military, administrative, and infrastructural strategies laid the practical foundations for the Tang, illustrating how a reunified state could integrate diverse regions under centralized authority. Beyond administration, the Sui demonstrated the potential for cultural and ideological unification. State rituals, Confucian education, and civil examinations, though limited in scope, were systematically employed to reinforce loyalty to the central authority. By maintaining continuity with Han traditions, the Sui positioned themselves as legitimate inheritors of a long imperial lineage, establishing ideological templates that the Tang would later expand upon. These foundations were not without strain. The Sui's ambitious military campaigns, particularly against Korea, combined with extensive construction projects, imposed heavy taxation and labor burdens. While these initiatives ultimately overstretched the dynasty, they provided a clear model of both the potential and the limits of central authority, offering lessons in governance, logistics, and civil-military relations. Over the next centuries, historians would note that the repeated cycles of fragmentation and reunification contributed to a unique resilience within Chinese statecraft. The centuries of local autonomy, frontier experimentation, and regional diversity allowed for innovative administrative, military, and economic practices to emerge. When the Tang Dynasty was established, it inherited not only the territorial gains of the Sui, but also a repository of institutional knowledge, lessons in statecraft, and strategies for managing ethnic and regional variation. The cosmopolitanism, centralized administration, and infrastructure that characterized the Tang were rooted in the trials and innovations of the post-Han era. The fragmentation of China in the centuries following 220 CE did not merely produce instability. It created the conditions for a state capable of combining strong central governance with practical accommodation of diverse local realities. By understanding the post-Han landscape, including the turbulence of northern and southern regions, the adaptation of non-Han groups, and the administrative achievements of the Sui, one can trace the mechanisms through which the Tang dynasty emerged. The Tang's later ability to integrate vast territories, manage frontier populations, and sponsor economic and cultural projects at an unprecedented scale depended on the lessons inherited from nearly 4 centuries of political fragmentation. These developments set the stage for the Tang's founding and the consolidation of imperial authority, illustrating how long-term historical processes created both the opportunities and constraints faced by one of China's most enduring dynasties. After several decades of consolidation under the Sui, the dynasty under Emperor Yang faced mounting internal and external pressures that ultimately led to its collapse. Emperor Yang pursued ambitious military campaigns against the Korean kingdom of Goguryeo, requiring vast mobilization of troops, supplies, and infrastructure. These campaigns, though initially intended to extend Sui influence and prestige, proved disastrous due to logistical failures, prolonged sieges, and the resilience of the Korean defenders. The repeated military overreach strained both the treasury and the population, as peasants were conscripted in large numbers, subjected to harsh labor for transport and fortification projects, and taxed heavily to fund campaigns that yielded limited success. Historical accounts indicate that widespread resentment emerged, particularly in northern provinces, where the combination of conscription, taxation, and natural disasters created fertile ground for rebellion. Amid this instability, the Li family, with roots in both Han and Xianbei lineages, emerged as key figures in the northwest. Their established reputation as military governors allowed them to exercise both administrative and martial authority in strategic border regions. Li Yuan, a seasoned general, and his son Li Shimin leveraged these positions to cultivate alliances with other frontier commanders and gain the loyalty of troops accustomed to frontier defense and independent command. This strategic positioning was enhanced by their control of Chang'an, the historical heart of the empire, providing both symbolic legitimacy and practical access to the central bureaucracy. The Li family's approach combined political pragmatism with military acumen. Rather than initiating reckless rebellion, they waited for opportune moments to consolidate support and neutralize rivals, learning from the failures of previous insurgents who lacked coordination or legitimacy. By integrating local elites, accommodating diverse ethnic groups, and presenting themselves as restorers of order, the Lis garnered sufficient authority to declare a new dynasty. In 618, following the assassination of Emperor Yang, Li Yuan established the Tang Dynasty, laying the foundation for one of China's most enduring and cosmopolitan empires. Their success illustrates the critical importance of strategic foresight, alliances, and control of symbolic and geographic centers in founding a stable state. The Tang's establishment under the Li family thus reflects a deliberate and measured response to the failures of the Sui, creating an administrative and military model that accommodated ethnic diversity, leveraged frontier strengths, and ensured central authority. With the dynasty officially founded, the next stage involved consolidating power across the empire, stabilizing governance, and integrating regional territories. Following the establishment of the Tang Dynasty in 618, Emperor Gaozu faced the formidable task of consolidating power across a realm long fractured by war, rebellion, and the collapse of Sui authority. While the Li family had successfully leveraged military strength and regional alliances to seize Chang'an, the newly founded dynasty required systematic governance to maintain stability and legitimacy. Recognizing the need for continuity, Gaozu reinstated many Sui institutions that had proven effective, including provincial administrative structures, tax registries, and codified legal frameworks. At the same time, he actively reduced the burdens that had generated widespread resentment under the Sui, including excessive corvée labor and high taxation. These measures helped to restore confidence among local populations and ensure that essential agricultural production and urban administration could resume with minimal disruption. In addition to internal reforms, Gaozu adopted a pragmatic diplomatic approach toward the Turkic powers along the northern frontiers. By establishing alliances, offering tribute, and arranging strategic marriages, he secured the loyalty of steppe groups whose military capabilities had previously threatened dynastic stability. Simultaneously, Gaozu retained and co-opted experienced officials from the Sui bureaucracy, using their knowledge to supervise taxation, law enforcement, and provincial oversight. These policies fostered both administrative continuity and the gradual reassertion of central authority across the empire. Archaeological and textual records suggest that these efforts stabilized key transport corridors and markets, allowing the Tang state to begin consolidating fiscal and military control. Despite these measures, internal tensions soon arose within the imperial family. Gaozu's sons, particularly Li Jianxing and Li Shimin, began competing for influence and the designation of heir. Li Shimin's exceptional military successes during the unification campaigns had earned him considerable prestige, creating friction with the crown prince and other court factions. These rivalries, while initially managed through careful delegation and advisory oversight, intensified over time and introduced a persistent element of uncertainty into court politics. The delicate balance between rewarding merit, preserving familial loyalty, and maintaining centralized authority illustrates the challenges of governance in a newly established dynasty. This period of consolidation under Gaozu established both the institutional foundation and the political tensions that would shape the Tang's future. The growing rivalry between Li Jianxing and Li Shimin set the stage for the dramatic confrontation at Xuanwu Gate, a turning point that would determine the direction and character of the dynasty under Taizong. In 626 CE, the Tang dynasty reached a decisive turning point with the Xuanwu Gate incident, an event that dramatically reshaped the trajectory of imperial authority. At the center of this confrontation was Li Shimin, the second son of Emperor Gaozu, whose military prowess and strategic acumen had distinguished him during the campaigns that consolidated Tang control over China. Despite his achievements, court politics increasingly placed him in conflict with his elder brother, Li Jianxing, the designated crown prince, and with their younger brother, Li Yuanji. Tensions arose from competing claims to succession, the distribution of military commands, and the influence each prince wielded over officials, generals, and court factions. Historical records indicate that Li Shimin, perceiving a direct threat to his survival and position, orchestrated a calculated ambush at Xuanwu Gate, the northern entrance to the imperial city of Chang'an. The planning of the coup was meticulous. Li Shimin coordinated loyal generals and personal guards, timed the operation to coincide with his brother's movements, and secured key positions within the palace to prevent interference. On the morning of the incident, Li Shimin's forces confronted Li Jianxing and Li Yuanji, swiftly eliminating both rivals. The removal of competing heirs forced Emperor Gaozu to confront the reality of power consolidation, leading him to abdicate in favor of Li Shimin. This transfer of authority was both legally and symbolically significant, demonstrating the effectiveness of decisive military action combined with pre-existing legitimacy derived from service and loyalty. As Emperor Taizong, Li Shimin instituted reforms that strengthened Tang governance while promoting inclusivity and meritocracy. He encouraged the use of open advisory councils, allowing officials to provide candid assessments of policy and administration. Historical documentation of his reign became a priority, with careful record-keeping serving both practical governance and the construction of ideological legitimacy. Taizong also codified rituals and procedures to reinforce the symbolic authority of the emperor while integrating Confucian principles into governance. These reforms stabilized the dynasty after the violent succession and laid the foundation for the Tang's golden age. The Xuanwu Gate incident, though an act of internal violence, demonstrates how strategic calculation, political foresight, and the consolidation of authority enabled a ruler to transform dynastic vulnerability into long-term institutional strength. With Taizong's authority secured, the dynasty entered a period of confident expansion, administrative reform, and cultural achievement that would define the early Tang era. Emperor Taizong recognized that the consolidation of internal authority and fiscal stability required a complementary system capable of defending the dynasty's extensive frontiers. To this end, he reorganized the Tang military around the fubbing system, a militia-based structure designed to provide a large, flexible, and cost-effective army. Under this system, able-bodied men were registered for military service and assigned land allotments, allowing them to support themselves agriculturally while remaining available for periodic training and mobilization. By linking land tenure to military obligation, the Tang established a durable connection between local communities and imperial defense, ensuring that frontier commanderies maintained forces capable of responding rapidly to threats without imposing unsustainable demands on state resources. The fubbing system enabled coordinated campaigns against both nomadic and sedentary adversaries. Tang armies conducted operations against the Eastern Turks, whose confederation had previously challenged the northern border, as well as against the Tuhan in the northwest and various oasis states across Central Asia. These campaigns combined strategic fortification, intelligence gathering, and the deployment of elite cavalry units adept at maneuvering across steppe, desert, and mountainous terrain. Importantly, Taizong integrated soldiers of diverse ethnic backgrounds into these forces, reflecting both the practical realities of frontier command and a broader policy of incorporating non-Han elites into imperial service. Such inclusivity strengthened loyalty, expanded manpower resources, and facilitated cultural exchange along contested corridors. The military organization also emphasized administrative efficiency. Commanders were responsible for both training and logistical oversight, ensuring that units were prepared for rapid mobilization without disrupting the agricultural productivity of the local population. This system reduced the economic strain typically associated with maintaining large standing armies, while allowing Tang forces to operate effectively across vast distances. The combination of the fubbing militia, professional officers, and elite cavalry created a versatile force capable of defending the empire's borders, projecting power into Central Asia, and responding to nomadic incursions with speed and precision. Through these military reforms, Emperor Taizong established a framework that not only secured the Tang's territorial integrity, but also enhanced its prestige across Eurasia. The success of these campaigns, grounded in disciplined organization and strategic foresight, reinforced the dynasty's political legitimacy and enabled the state to invest confidently in cultural, scholarly, and administrative initiatives. These developments paved the way for the Tang to enter one of the most celebrated periods in Chinese history, characterized by prosperity, intellectual flourishing, and expansive influence. Following his accession in 626 CE, Emperor Taizong faced the immediate task of consolidating authority over a dynasty still recovering from decades of fragmentation and civil unrest. The Xuanwu Gate incident had established his supremacy, but it also left lingering uncertainty among officials, regional commanders, and members of the imperial family. Recognizing the precarious nature of his position, Taizong adopted a deliberate strategy to legitimize his rule, combining acts of clemency with systematic administrative reform. He reduced punitive measures against former opponents, pardoned those who had been aligned with his rivals, and sought to demonstrate that the dynasty's authority was rooted not solely in coercion, but in fairness and effective governance. This approach reassured both bureaucrats and the general populace that the new emperor's rule would be stable, predictable, and morally grounded. A critical component of Taizong's strategy was the institutionalization of a policy of open remonstrance, whereby ministers were encouraged to provide candid advice, critique imperial decisions, and identify administrative weaknesses. Figures such as Wei Zheng became central to this process, providing forthright counsel that, while sometimes politically risky, strengthened the overall quality of governance. By fostering an environment in which dissent was tolerated within structured channels, Taizong improved oversight across both the central and provincial administrations. This policy reinforced meritocracy, ensuring that competent officials were rewarded on the basis of ability rather than personal loyalty or familial connection. Concurrently, Taizong reorganized the central bureaucracy into the classical 3 departments and 6 ministries model. The Department of State Affairs, the Secretariat, and the Chancellery coordinated policy formulation, execution, and review, while the 6 ministries, personnel, revenue, rights, war, justice, and public works, specialized in core aspects of governance. This structure formalized lines of authority, clarified responsibilities, and provided mechanisms for accountability, creating a disciplined administrative framework that would endure for centuries. Through these methodical reforms, Emperor Taizong transformed the Tang state into a centralized, efficient, and morally guided government. The combination of political clemency, structured advisement, and bureaucratic organization not only stabilized the dynasty internally, but also prepared the Tang for confident engagement with neighboring states. With imperial authority firmly consolidated, the dynasty could now pursue foreign policy and expansionist strategies with a clarity and coherence that reflected both administrative competence and moral legitimacy. Following the consolidation of internal authority, Emperor Taizong turned his attention to the broader world beyond China's borders, recognizing that a stable and prosperous empire required both secure frontiers and constructive relations with neighboring polities. His foreign policy was characterized by a combination of diplomacy, selective military action, strategic marriages, and the integration of multi-ethnic elites into Tang administration. Central to this approach was the management of relations with the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, a powerful nomadic confederation whose mobility and military capabilities posed both a threat and an opportunity. By supporting internal divisions within the Khaganate and eventually defeating its leadership, Taizong absorbed key Turkic elites into the Tang military and bureaucratic structures, effectively extending Chinese influence deep into the steppe, while simultaneously mitigating the risk of recurrent raids. Taizong's diplomatic strategy also relied on the careful deployment of the Haqin marriage system, which formalized marital alliances with neighboring rulers to secure loyalty and stabilize relations. This system was complemented by a robust tributary framework, whereby neighboring states acknowledged the Tang emperor's suzerainty in exchange for trade privileges, political recognition, and symbolic gifts. Such arrangements emphasized reciprocal obligations, blending ritual legitimacy with practical geopolitical advantage. Through these mechanisms, the Tang court cultivated a perception of authority that combined military credibility, cultural prestige, and administrative sophistication. The administration further promoted cross-cultural integration along the Silk Road, appointing multicultural officials who facilitated trade, communication, and political coordination across the diverse territories of Central Asia. Oasis states, Tibetan polities, and Korean kingdoms were incorporated into networks of influence that allowed the Tang to project power while respecting local autonomy and customs. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that these arrangements enhanced both economic exchange and political stability, fostering cosmopolitan centers such as Dunhuang and Chang'an as hubs of commerce, religion, and culture. By positioning the Tang emperor as both cultural leader and political arbiter, Taizong established a model of foreign relations that reinforced domestic legitimacy while extending the empire's reach across Eurasia. This careful balancing of diplomacy, military oversight, and multicultural administration created conditions for sustained influence. To support and maintain this external engagement, the Tang now turned to economic and land reforms that stabilized internal resources and taxation systems, ensuring the foundations of the empire's expanding influence. To secure long-term governance and maintain the Tang dynasty's expansive reach, Emperor Taizong implemented a set of fiscal and land policies that became central to the state's stability. Foremost among these reforms was the equal field system, or Juntian, which sought to regulate land distribution in a manner that balanced the needs of households with the requirements of the state. Under this system, arable land was allocated to families based on the number of adult laborers and the household's capacity to cultivate it. By assigning land in proportion to productive potential rather than hereditary ownership, the state ensured a relatively equitable distribution that mitigated the accumulation of vast estates by elite families and prevented the economic fragmentation that had destabilized earlier dynasties. The equal field system served multiple administrative and fiscal purposes. It created a predictable and stable rural tax base, supporting the grain tribute system that underpinned central revenues. These taxes, in turn, funded corvée labor obligations, state-sponsored infrastructure projects, and military conscription, reinforcing the integration of agrarian communities into the broader apparatus of governance. Accurate registration of households and cultivated land was critical for maintaining this system, though challenges arose from population mobility, migration to urban centers, and the natural expansion of family holdings over time. Officials were tasked with conducting regular surveys and updating records to ensure compliance, reflecting the sophisticated bureaucratic oversight that characterized Tang administration. In addition to fiscal benefits, the equal field system reinforced the social contract between the imperial state and its agrarian population. By guaranteeing access to land, the government legitimized its authority and encouraged productive participation in taxation and labor duties. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests that these policies facilitated both demographic growth and agricultural stability, providing the material resources necessary to support frontier defense initiatives and long-distance trade. The system also strengthened the link between central authority and local communities, enabling the Tang to project administrative reach even into regions distant from Chang'an. Ultimately, the equal field system exemplifies how a methodical approach to land policy became the engine of economic, social, and military stability for the Tang state. With fiscal foundations secured, the dynasty was positioned to enhance its military capacity, fortify its frontiers, and consolidate control over an increasingly diverse and expansive empire, paving the way for further administrative and military initiatives under Taizong's leadership. Emperor Taizong recognized that the consolidation of internal authority and fiscal stability required a complementary system capable of defending the dynasty's extensive frontiers. To this end, he reorganized the Tang military around the phubbing system, a militia-based structure designed to provide a large, flexible, and cost-effective army. Under this system, able-bodied men were registered for military service and assigned land allotments, allowing them to support themselves agriculturally while remaining available for periodic training and mobilization. By linking land tenure to military obligation, the Tang established a durable connection between local communities and imperial defense, ensuring that frontier commanderies maintained forces capable of responding rapidly to threats without imposing unsustainable demands on state resources. The phubbing system enabled coordinated campaigns against both nomadic and sedentary adversaries. Tang armies conducted operations against the Eastern Turks, whose confederation had previously challenged the northern border, as well as against the Chang'an in the northwest and various oasis states across Central Asia. These campaigns combined strategic fortification, intelligence gathering, and the deployment of elite cavalry units adept at maneuvering across steppe, desert, and mountainous terrain. Importantly, Taizong integrated soldiers of diverse ethnic backgrounds into these forces, reflecting both the practical realities of frontier command and a broader policy of incorporating non-Han elites into imperial service. Such inclusivity strengthened loyalty, expanded manpower resources, and facilitated cultural exchange along contested corridors. The military organization also emphasized administrative efficiency. Commanders were responsible for both training and logistical oversight, ensuring that units were prepared for rapid mobilization without disrupting the agricultural productivity of the local population. This system reduced the economic strain typically associated with maintaining large standing armies, while allowing Tang forces to operate effectively across vast distances. The combination of the Fubing militia, professional officers, and elite cavalry created a versatile force capable of defending the empire's borders, projecting power into Central Asia, and responding to nomadic incursions with speed and precision. Through these military reforms, Emperor Taizong established a framework that not only secured the Tang's territorial integrity, but also enhanced its prestige across Eurasia. The success of these campaigns, grounded in disciplined organization and strategic foresight, reinforced the dynasty's political legitimacy and enabled the state to invest confidently in cultural, scholarly, and administrative initiatives. These developments paved the way for the Tang to enter one of the most celebrated periods in Chinese history, characterized by prosperity, intellectual flourishing, and expansive influence. Under Emperor Taizong, the Tang dynasty experienced a remarkable alignment of political stability and cultural development, establishing the conditions for a sustained intellectual and artistic flowering. Recognizing the importance of historical consciousness, Taizong commissioned the compilation and re-editing of official historical records, most notably the Book of Jing. These efforts not only preserved the chronicles of preceding dynasties, but also established rigorous standards for historiography, emphasizing accuracy, structure, and moral evaluation. Scholars involved in these projects contributed to the formation of a professional intellectual class that combined bureaucratic service with literary and historical scholarship, reinforcing the symbiosis between governance and culture. Chang'an, as the imperial capital, became a cosmopolitan hub for religious, artistic, and scholarly activity. Buddhist monasteries flourished alongside Taoist temples, creating spaces for theological debate, ritual practice, and the translation of foreign scriptures. These institutions also served as centers of learning, attracting scholars, artisans, and students from across the empire and beyond. Artistic experimentation extended to painting, sculpture, and decorative arts, with court patronage enabling the refinement of techniques and the fusion of domestic and foreign influences. The influx of Central Asian and steppe cultures along the Silk Road further enriched the intellectual climate, providing new motifs, musical forms, and narrative traditions that were incorporated into Tang artistic expression. The expansion of the imperial examination system under Taizong contributed directly to cultural and administrative development. By providing avenues for men of ability, including those from non-aristocratic families, to enter government service, the state cultivated a meritocratic bureaucracy that valued scholarly accomplishment. This system encouraged literacy, classical study, and administrative skill, while simultaneously creating a feedback loop in which governance and intellectual life reinforced each other. The proliferation of talented officials, poets, and advisors contributed to a literate and cosmopolitan court environment, in which policymaking, historiography, and literary production were intertwined. The cultural and intellectual initiatives of Taizong's reign demonstrate how deliberate political consolidation can foster creative and scholarly innovation. By stabilizing governance, institutionalizing meritocratic pathways, and supporting historical and religious scholarship, Taizong established a model in which state stability directly facilitated cultural growth. These foundations enabled the Tang Dynasty to enter a period of even greater prosperity and artistic achievement under his successors, particularly during the transformative reign of Emperor Gaozong. Following Emperor Gaozong's accession in 649 CE, the Tang Dynasty entered a period of careful continuity and gradual transformation. Gaozong, while inheriting the institutional and administrative structures established under Taizong, faced the dual challenges of asserting his own authority and managing the complexities of an expanding empire. He retained many experienced ministers and advisors from his father's court, valuing their expertise in civil administration, military coordination, and fiscal management. Policies concerning land distribution, taxation, and frontier defense continued to reflect the careful balance between central authority and local autonomy that had characterized Taizong's reign. However, Gaozong's physical frailty and recurring health problems increasingly limited his capacity to oversee daily governance, creating structural openings that reshaped power dynamics within the court. Wu Zhao, who had initially entered the palace as a concubine under Taizong, emerged as a decisive figure during this period. Her intelligence, administrative skill, and political acumen enabled her to gain the emperor's trust, positioning her to supervise court affairs, review memorials, and influence appointments. Historical records suggest that Wu Zhao developed networks of allies among ministers, secretaries, and palace officials, carefully navigating factional rivalries and consolidating her influence. By managing both the bureaucratic processes and the flow of information to the emperor, she effectively became the central coordinating authority in the Tang court, ensuring that her guidance shaped both policy outcomes and personnel decisions. This period illustrates the combination of circumstance and capability that allowed Wu Zhao to exercise unprecedented power. Gaozong's reliance on her administrative judgment was reinforced by her ability to anticipate political challenges, mediate disputes among officials, and maintain continuity of governance during periods when the emperor was incapacitated. Wu Zhao's ascent was facilitated not only by personal proximity to the emperor, but also by her mastery of institutional processes and strategic alliance building. These factors enabled her to emerge as a central actor in Tang governance, redefining the role of women in imperial politics while maintaining stability in the bureaucracy. Understanding the rise of Wu Zhao clarifies how the Tang court adapted to internal vulnerabilities, illustrating the interplay between personal influence and institutional structures. As her authority increased, the dynasty undertook significant bureaucratic and ideological reorganization, setting the stage for the transformative reforms and centralized control that would define her tenure as empress. During the later years of Emperor Gaozong's reign, Wu Zetian transformed her influence from de facto authority into an unprecedented model of administrative control. Her ascent relied on a careful combination of political acumen, strategic alliances, and institutional innovation. Recognizing the entrenched power of aristocratic clans that had dominated Tang politics, Wu systematically weakened their influence by promoting loyal officials, creating oversight mechanisms, and, when necessary, deploying secret police networks to monitor and neutralize potential opposition. These measures were not purely coercive. They were designed to ensure that administrative competence and personal loyalty aligned with the central authority, reducing the risk of factionalism and instability within the court. Central to her reforms was the expansion of the imperial examination system. Wu Zetian actively recruited talented men from modest or non-aristocratic backgrounds, ensuring that their positions in government depended directly on her patronage rather than family connections. This shift broadened the administrative talent pool, reinforced meritocratic principles, and diminished the dominance of hereditary elites. By prioritizing competence over lineage, she fostered a bureaucracy capable of implementing policy efficiently across a vast and diverse empire. Simultaneously, she reorganized the central administration, clarifying lines of authority and strengthening oversight in provincial and military offices. These measures created a government increasingly responsive to the emperor while insulated from traditional elite pressures. Wu Zetian's consolidation also involved selective purges and political maneuvering that, while controversial, reflected both the precariousness of her position and the structural necessity of controlling a vast bureaucratic apparatus. Contemporary records indicate that accusations of impropriety or disloyalty were used strategically to remove obstacles rather than as indiscriminate persecution, and her reforms were carefully codified to maintain administrative continuity. These initiatives allowed her to maintain authority effectively, ultimately culminating in her unprecedented declaration of the Zhou dynasty in 690, supplanting the Tang name while retaining the governmental infrastructure that had underpinned the dynasty. Through targeted institutional restructuring, Wu Zetian demonstrated how systemic reform could replace entrenched dynastic power without widespread revolt. By reshaping personnel, centralizing authority, and reinforcing merit-based administration, she established a durable model of governance. With the Zhou dynasty formally proclaimed, the next phase of her reign would define both the administrative identity and political culture of the empire under her independent authority. In 690 CE, Wu Zetian formally declared the establishment of the Zhou dynasty, becoming the only woman in Chinese history to assume the title of emperor in her own right. This unprecedented act required careful justification to secure both elite acquiescence and popular legitimacy. Wu employed a combination of ritual, prophecy, and bureaucratic endorsement to validate her rule. Buddhist scriptures, interpreted to predict the rise of a female sovereign, were widely disseminated, and omens were publicized to present her ascension as divinely sanctioned. Simultaneously, she leveraged administrative channels to obtain formal endorsements from officials and scholars, framing her reign as a continuation of moral governance rather than a disruptive usurpation. Wu Zetian's policies emphasized stability, economic growth, and administrative efficiency. Agricultural productivity was promoted through improved irrigation, land surveys, and redistribution programs, ensuring that taxation was equitable and sustainable. The imperial examination system, which she had previously expanded, continued to be strengthened, allowing talented individuals from non-aristocratic backgrounds to enter government service and further professionalizing the bureaucracy. Wu actively combated corruption, establishing inspection offices and disciplinary mechanisms to monitor officials at both central and provincial levels. By reinforcing accountability and meritocracy, she maintained effective governance despite persistent factional opposition. Religious patronage played a central role in consolidating her authority. Wu Zetian supported Buddhist institutions, commissioning major translation projects, sponsoring temple construction, and promoting monastic scholarship. Buddhism provided both ideological justification for her rule and practical channels for social influence, helping to unify diverse populations under the Zhou banner. Simultaneously, she maintained the administrative and military structures inherited from the Tang, ensuring continuity in governance while introducing reforms that reflected her strategic priorities. Despite elite resistance, Wu Zetian's reign achieved notable territorial stability, economic resilience, and institutional innovation. Her ability to maintain imperial authority for over 15 years demonstrates how ideological framing, bureaucratic control, and targeted reforms can overcome challenges to legitimacy. This period provides a unique example of alternative pathways to political power in imperial China. Eventually, a coalition of court factions moved to restore the Tang Dynasty, setting the stage for the post-Wu recalibration of governance and imperial authority. In 705 CE, the Tang Dynasty was restored following the decline of Wu Zetian's health and the increasing concentration of power in her favored courtiers, which had generated both resentment and instability within the court. Recognizing an opportunity, a coalition of senior officials, including Zhang Jianji, orchestrated a palace coup that reinstalled Emperor Zhongzong, a former Tang heir, to the throne. This transition marked the formal return of the Li family to power while simultaneously navigating the institutional and bureaucratic structures that Wu Zetian had developed during her reign. The restoration was carefully managed to ensure continuity of governance, avoiding the wholesale dismantling of administrative frameworks that had proven effective. The restored Tang court retained many of Wu Zetian's reforms, particularly the expansion and institutionalization of the imperial examination system. By maintaining this meritocratic mechanism, the dynasty preserved a method for recruiting capable officials from diverse social backgrounds, reducing the dominance of hereditary aristocratic clans and ensuring competent administration across the empire. Provincial oversight, disciplinary structures, and personnel evaluation systems were similarly preserved, reflecting a pragmatic approach to governance that balanced continuity with the reassertion of Li family authority. These policies facilitated administrative efficiency and reinforced central authority even as the dynasty sought to re-establish its symbolic legitimacy. However, the reorientation of power also introduced new challenges. Imperial relatives, consorts, and influential courtiers vied for access to the emperor, creating factionalism that often undermined cohesive decision-making. While the restored Tang preserved stability and administrative competence, the court became more volatile than during the earlier Golden Age under Taizong and Gaozong. This environment required careful political navigation and highlighted the enduring tension between centralized authority and competing personal interests within the palace. The post-Wu restoration demonstrates how a dynasty can combine continuity and adaptation. By preserving effective reforms while reasserting dynastic legitimacy, the Tang ensured both institutional strength and political flexibility. These developments created a foundation for the next era, in which cultural brilliance, intellectual achievement, and imperial prestige would reach new heights under Emperor Xuanzong. Wu Zetian's reign left a profound and enduring impact on Tang culture, religious life, and intellectual development, shaping trajectories that extended well beyond her tenure. Her policies and patronage fostered the growth of Buddhist institutions, both in urban centers like Chang'an and in remote monastic complexes along strategic trade routes. Temples and monasteries became centers of learning, translation, and cultural exchange, facilitating the integration of foreign ideas, texts, and artistic forms into the Chinese intellectual milieu. The emphasis on Buddhism as a source of political legitimacy also encouraged the production of religious literature, ritual manuals, and monumental inscriptions, contributing to a flourishing of textual and material culture. In the literary domain, Wu's patronage coincided with the early development of regulated verse, liushi, a formalized poetic structure that would become a hallmark of Tang poetry. Court-sponsored literary activities and competitions encouraged experimentation within classical frameworks, while scholars and officials cultivated skills in rhetoric, historical analysis, and philosophical discourse. Confucian scholars, responding to Wu's unprecedented role as a female ruler, developed more explicit theories of political legitimacy and moral governance, creating a body of thought that informed subsequent dynastic historiography and imperial ideology. These debates emphasized the integration of ethical principles with practical administration, reinforcing the connection between intellectual rigor and effective statecraft. Wu Zetian's reforms also expanded social mobility by opening pathways for non-elite families to enter the bureaucracy through the examination system. By diversifying the administrative talent pool, she ensured that governance relied on ability rather than solely on hereditary privilege, enabling a broader segment of society to contribute to policymaking and cultural production. This inclusion fostered a more cosmopolitan and dynamic elite, laying the groundwork for the social and intellectual richness of the mid-Tang period. Overall, Wu Zetian's reign demonstrates how a ruler's ideological choices, ranging from religious patronage to bureaucratic reform, can produce lasting cultural and intellectual effects. By reshaping the mechanisms of governance, promoting learning and artistic expression, and redefining pathways to official service, she left a durable imprint on the Tang Dynasty. With the political and cultural landscape transformed, the dynasty was poised to enter the height of prosperity and creativity under Emperor Xuanzong's early reign, marking the next chapter of Tang history. Emperor Xuanzong ascended the throne in 712 CE during a period of significant political turbulence. The preceding decades had been marked by factionalism, palace intrigue, and the lingering influence of powerful consorts, most notably Empress Wei, whose dominance had threatened the stability of the imperial court. Xuanzong's accession was supported by a coalition of senior officials and palace figures who sought to restore order and reassert the authority of the emperor. Recognizing the structural weaknesses exposed by previous conflicts, Xuanzong prioritized administrative renewal, aiming to re-establish central control, professionalize the bureaucracy, and reduce the disruptive influence of palace factions. Central to these efforts was the appointment of capable and respected officials who combined moral integrity with administrative competence. Figures such as Yao Chong and Song Jing were entrusted with oversight of the central bureaucracy, tasked with investigating corruption, enforcing disciplinary measures, and standardizing procedures across ministries. These reforms emphasized merit and accountability over personal connections or aristocratic privilege, reinforcing the principles of governance established in earlier Tang administrations. The reassertion of central authority included careful supervision of provincial administrations, ensuring that local officials adhered to imperial directives while maintaining efficient tax collection and resource management. Fiscal prudence was another key focus of Xuanzong's early reign. Clear tax procedures were reinstated, and the equal field system, Juntian, was reinforced to guarantee equitable land distribution and a reliable revenue base. These measures allowed the imperial government to support both civil administration and military obligations without overburdening the peasantry or destabilizing rural economies. By combining administrative oversight with disciplined fiscal management, Xuanzong created a foundation of stability that enabled more effective governance and prepared the state for the economic and cultural expansion that would characterize the High Tang period. Through these reforms, Emperor Xuanzong transformed a dynasty weakened by factional rivalry into a stable and efficient regime. The combination of professionalized bureaucracy, fiscal discipline, and centralized authority allowed the Tang state to re-establish administrative coherence and legitimacy. With the structures of governance strengthened, the dynasty was poised to leverage its economic and demographic resources, setting the stage for a period of unprecedented prosperity and cultural achievement in the subsequent decades. During the early 8th century, Tang China experienced a period of remarkable economic expansion, fueled by population growth, agricultural innovation, and sophisticated infrastructure. Advances in farming techniques, including improved irrigation, crop rotation, and the cultivation of high-yield strains of rice and wheat, contributed to significant increases in agricultural productivity. These developments ensured a stable food supply that could support both the growing urban population and the demands of a large military apparatus. The equal field system, Juntian, continued to function effectively, providing the imperial government with a reliable fiscal base for taxation while preventing the monopolization of land by powerful elites. By balancing productive capacity with equitable distribution, the Tang state maintained both social stability and fiscal sustainability. A critical factor in the Tang economic system was the Grand Canal network, which connected the agriculturally rich Yangtze River basin with northern capitals such as Chang'an and Luoyang. The canal facilitated efficient transportation of grain, goods, and personnel, allowing the imperial court to secure resources across vast distances. Military garrisons, provincial administrations, and urban centers benefited from this reliable supply chain, which enhanced both logistical coordination and state control. The canal's importance extended beyond practical administration. It also encouraged regional economic specialization, enabling surplus production in certain areas to be redistributed efficiently throughout the empire. Urban growth paralleled these economic developments. Chang'an, the primary imperial capital, became a densely populated hub of commerce, administration, and cultural exchange, with organized markets, foreign merchant quarters, and carefully regulated urban planning. Luoyang similarly served as a secondary capital, facilitating trade, governmental oversight, and cultural activity. Both cities reflected a balance of imperial control and commercial dynamism, attracting merchants, artisans, and scholars from across Eurasia. The interconnectedness of agricultural production, transportation infrastructure, and urban markets created a cohesive economic sphere that underpinned the Tang Dynasty's prosperity. This combination of logistical innovation, fiscal reliability, and urban vitality established Tang China as one of the most integrated and commercially active economies of the pre-modern world. The material wealth and stability generated by this system provided the resources necessary for the court to sponsor extensive artistic, literary, and intellectual achievements, laying the groundwork for the cultural heights that define the High Tang era. During Emperor Xuanzong's reign, the Tang Dynasty achieved an unprecedented cultural and intellectual flourishing that would later be recognized as a pinnacle of Chinese artistic achievement. This period, often referred to as the High Tang, was characterized by the remarkable development of poetry, painting, music, and philosophy, supported by state patronage and the cosmopolitan character of the empire. The literary scene was dominated by poets such as Li Bai, Du Fu, and Wang Wei, whose works exemplified both technical mastery and profound engagement with the social, natural, and political worlds. Li Bai's imaginative and lyrical verse captured the expansiveness of experience, while Du Fu's writings reflected societal concerns, governance, and human suffering, and Wang Wei's poems combined philosophical reflection with visual imagery, demonstrating the integration of intellectual and artistic sensibilities. Visual arts also advanced considerably during this era. Court painters refined techniques in portraiture and landscape painting, experimenting with composition, brushwork, and spatial perspective. Influences from Central Asia and regions along the Silk Road were incorporated into artistic production, reflecting the empire's openness to foreign ideas and aesthetic exchange. Music similarly evolved, blending domestic traditions with instruments and performance styles introduced through international contacts, resulting in rich court orchestras and elaborate ceremonial compositions. The imperial examination system played a key role in cultivating a literati culture, providing talented individuals access to official positions based on mastery of classical texts and rhetorical skill. This system not only reinforced meritocracy in governance, but also elevated intellectual and artistic achievement as markers of social and political influence. Educated officials became patrons and producers of literature, contributing to an environment in which creative excellence and civic service were intertwined. This convergence of political stability, fiscal capacity, and openness to foreign exchange created conditions under which Tang China became a reference point for East Asian culture. State sponsorship, urban vibrancy, and cosmopolitan interactions fostered an integrated artistic and intellectual environment. The cultural brilliance of Xuanzong's reign thus paralleled the dynasty's territorial ambition and administrative strength, setting the stage for the next phase in which Tang military power extended the empire's influence across Eurasia. During Emperor Xuanzong's early reign, the Tang dynasty consolidated its reputation as a preeminent military and diplomatic power in East and Central Asia. The empire's armies, structured around a combination of professional units and the fubbing militia system, were increasingly coordinated through the office of the Jidushi, regional military governors responsible for frontier defense, logistics, and local administration. These commanders enabled the Tang to maintain security across borders stretching from the Korean peninsula in the east to the Central Asian steppes and oases in the west. Their authority allowed rapid mobilization against nomadic incursions, rebellions, and rival states, ensuring the dynasty's dominance over both sedentary and mobile populations. Tang influence in the Darien Basin was particularly significant. Protectorates such as Anxi allowed the empire to control key Silk Road routes, securing trade, diplomatic channels, and the movement of ideas across Eurasia. This territorial reach facilitated not only the flow of commodities such as silk, horses, and grains, but also the exchange of art, religion, and technology. Tang envoys and military forces engaged with diverse powers, including the Abbasid Caliphate, Tibetan polities, the Uyghurs, and the Nanzhao Kingdom, negotiating alliances, tribute, and strategic partnerships. The empire's ability to act as both regional hegemon and active participant in wider Eurasian diplomacy exemplified a sophisticated understanding of political and cultural interdependence. Despite these successes, the autonomy granted to regional commanders carried long-term implications. While the Jidushi system ensured rapid military responses and efficient frontier management, It also concentrated substantial power in the hands of individuals far from central oversight. Over time, this structural arrangement would complicate succession, governance, and central authority, particularly when strong emperors were absent or distracted. The Tang's frontier strategies illustrate a duality in imperial administration. They expanded the dynasty's global influence and secured economic and cultural exchange, yet they simultaneously introduced latent vulnerabilities within the political system. By projecting power across vast, culturally diverse regions, the Tang established a model of Eurasian connectivity, setting the stage for both extraordinary prosperity and the complex internal challenges that would later test the dynasty's resilience. In the later decades of Emperor Xuanzong's reign, court life reached a level of refinement and luxury that reflected both the dynasty's prosperity and the emperor's personal inclinations. Central to this period was the rise of consort Yang Yuhuan, whose beauty, intelligence, and cultural sophistication earned her exceptional favor. Her influence extended beyond personal companionship, as members of her family were granted positions of authority and prestige within the court, gradually shifting political weight away from previously disciplined bureaucratic oversight. This concentration of power in the hands of consorts and their relatives subtly altered the balance of governance, creating opportunities for favoritism and weakening traditional administrative checks. Concurrently, military figures gained prominence within the imperial system. Most notably, Lu Shan, a frontier general of mixed Sogdian and Turkic ancestry, accrued substantial authority over northern military commands. His strategic command of border armies, combined with his access to court patronage, allowed him to amass both personal loyalty from troops and considerable political influence. While Xuanzong's earlier reforms had strengthened the central bureaucracy, the growing dependence on favored individuals meant that meritocratic oversight became increasingly subordinate to personal networks and courtly alliances. This period also saw the interplay of cultural opulence and administrative oversight. Xuanzong's patronage of art, music, poetry, and ceremonial display fostered a vibrant intellectual climate, but it coincided with declining vigilance over provincial and military affairs. Luxurious lifestyles, elaborate court entertainments, and extensive artistic projects gradually diverted attention and resources from the mechanisms of state control. While these developments did not immediately destabilize the dynasty, they created underlying vulnerabilities. Favoritism, concentrated military power, and the erosion of bureaucratic rigor provided conditions in which ambitious figures could challenge central authority. And Lu Shan's growing independence and personal command foreshadowed the catastrophic rebellion that would later engulf the empire. The courtly elegance and cultural brilliance of Xuanzong's late reign thus existed alongside emerging structural weaknesses. These tensions, between aesthetic cultivation and administrative discipline, personal favor and institutional authority, prepared the conditions for one of the most profound crises in Tang history, setting the stage for the Lu Shan rebellion and its transformative consequences for the dynasty. By the mid-8th century, the Tang dynasty's administrative and military structures, which had once underpinned remarkable stability and expansion, had developed critical vulnerabilities. Central to these weaknesses was the delegation of frontier defense to regional military governors, or jidushi, a system designed to protect China's vast borders from nomadic incursions and internal unrest. Over time, these commanders gained substantial autonomy, controlling local revenues, personnel, and military forces with minimal interference from the central government. While initially effective in maintaining security, the concentration of authority in frontier hands created a structural imbalance, giving ambitious generals the means to challenge imperial oversight. Among the most prominent of these frontier figures was Lu Shan, a general of Sogdian and Turkic origin who commanded a network of key northern armies across Fanyang, Pinglu, and Hudou. His forces were not only large but ethnically diverse, reflecting both the cosmopolitan nature of Tang military recruitment and the empire's reliance on frontier populations for defense. And Lu Shan cultivated close personal ties to the court, gaining favor with Emperor Xuanzong and establishing connections with the family of consort Yang Yuhuan. These relationships afforded him political legitimacy and access to resources far beyond those of a typical provincial commander, allowing him to expand his influence both militarily and administratively. Simultaneously, tensions between the central government and frontier governors intensified. Palace oversight had weakened as court attention shifted toward cultural pursuits and personal patronage, while corruption and bureaucratic inefficiency undermined fiscal and administrative control. Heavy taxation and labor demands added social pressure, eroding popular support for the central state and leaving local communities more susceptible to the influence of regional commanders. The combination of personal ambition, structural autonomy, and systemic stress created conditions in which a determined general could mobilize forces capable of confronting the imperial government directly. And Liu Shan's unique position at the intersection of military authority, court favor, and frontier governance transformed what had been a defensive necessity into a potential existential threat. The empire's reliance on regional commanders, designed to extend Tang influence across a vast and diverse landscape, inadvertently provided the means for one man to ignite a rebellion that would rapidly escalate into a nationwide crisis. These foundational vulnerabilities set the stage for the outbreak of one of the most devastating conflicts in Chinese history. In late 755 CE, the Tang Dynasty faced an unprecedented crisis as Liu Shan, commanding a substantial and well-organized army, declared himself emperor of a new Yin dynasty. From his strongholds in the north, he initiated a rapid and strategically coordinated advance toward Luoyang, the eastern capital, exploiting both the empire's overextended frontier defenses and internal administrative weaknesses. Tang forces, though numerically adequate on paper, were hampered by miscommunication, fragmented command structures, and a lack of coordinated strategy. The division of authority between regional military governors and central administrators created delays in mobilization, leaving key approaches to the capital insufficiently defended. As Liu Shan's forces approached, the imperial court's internal factionalism further undermined an effective response. Rivalries among officials and generals resulted in inconsistent orders and contradictory strategies, while political distrust prevented the pooling of loyalist forces into a coherent defense. Luoyang fell with alarming speed, its capture demonstrating both the tactical proficiency of Liu Shan's army and the vulnerabilities inherent in Tang governance. The occupation of the eastern capital not only disrupted administrative continuity, but also signaled to other frontier commanders and regional populations that imperial authority was faltering. The rebellion's momentum continued westward, threatening Chang'an, the primary imperial capital. Emperor Xuanzong, recognizing the imminent danger, fled with his court and household, leaving the city effectively defenseless. The evacuation underscored the failure of early warning systems and the absence of an emergency mobilization protocol capable of countering a large-scale internal rebellion. With the twin capitals occupied or abandoned, the Tang Dynasty experienced a profound symbolic rupture. The perception of inviolable imperial power that had sustained the High Tang era was irreversibly damaged. The rapid loss of Luoyang and Chang'an illustrates how structural weaknesses, coupled with decisive military initiative by a well-positioned general, could overturn centuries of administrative and cultural stability. The dynasty was forced into emergency governance, confronting not only military defeat, but also the collapse of centralized authority. This crisis precipitated leadership transitions, strategic recalibration, and attempts at recovery, setting the stage for a protracted conflict that would transform Tang political, social, and economic structures. Following the rapid advance of Liu Shan's forces and the fall of Chang'an in 756 CE, the Tang dynasty faced an immediate legitimacy crisis. Emperor Xuanzong's flight left the capital vulnerable, and the perception of imperial authority was severely undermined. In this context, political tensions and popular frustration erupted dramatically at Maowei, a military encampment where imperial troops, angered by perceived mismanagement and the influence of consort Yang Yuhuan and her relatives, demanded accountability. Facing threats from his own army, Xuanzong acquiesced to their demands, and consort Yang, along with several of her kin, were executed. This incident not only removed the court figures blamed for the dynasty's sudden vulnerability, but also signaled the fragility of centralized authority when personal influence conflicted with structural governance. In the aftermath, Xuanzong's son, Li Hong, established a new political center at Lingwu in the northwestern frontier, where he proclaimed himself Emperor Suzong. By asserting formal authority in the rebel-controlled landscape, Suzong provided a focal point for loyalist forces and ensured continuity of imperial legitimacy. The existence of dual courts, Xuanzong still alive and retired in the south, Suzong actively ruling in Lingwu, symbolized the fragmented state of the Tang government, illustrating the challenges of succession and the complexities of maintaining command during extreme crises. The dual court situation complicated strategic decision-making. Suzong had to coordinate military responses against a formidable rebel army while navigating the symbolic weight of his father's presence and authority. Loyalties among generals, administrators, and provincial governors were tested, requiring careful negotiation and political dexterity to prevent further defections. Despite these obstacles, the establishment of a functional imperial center at Lingwu allowed the dynasty to consolidate loyalist forces, plan counteroffensives, and reassert some measure of administrative coherence. This phase demonstrates how the Tang court navigated the intersection of personal authority, institutional continuity, and military necessity under existential threat. By combining rapid leadership adaptation with decisive action to remove sources of internal resentment, the dynasty preserved a thread of legitimacy, laying the groundwork for assembling both domestic and foreign coalitions to confront the rebellion, which is the focus of the subsequent military campaigns. In response to the rapid expansion of the Lushan rebellion, the Tang dynasty mounted a comprehensive counteroffensive that relied on both internal reorganization and strategic external alliances. Central to this effort was the negotiation with the Uyghur Khaganate, a powerful steppe confederation whose cavalry forces provided critical reinforcement. In exchange for trade privileges, political recognition, and assurances of favorable treatment, Uyghur forces joined Tang armies in campaigns to recapture the eastern and western capitals, bringing both mobility and tactical expertise that Tang forces alone could not fully supply. This partnership exemplified the dynasty's pragmatic approach to survival, blending diplomacy, economic incentives, and military necessity in order to restore imperial control. Key Tang generals, including Guizi and Li Guangbi, played pivotal roles in organizing loyalist forces. They implemented disciplined defensive strategies, reinforced supply lines, and coordinated multi-front operations to contain and eventually reverse rebel advances. Their leadership also mitigated internal coordination challenges arising from autonomous regional commanders, providing a framework for operational cohesion despite the empire's fragmented administrative structure. Meanwhile, the Yin regime faced internal divisions, logistical strains, and declining morale, which, combined with the Tang, Uyghur pressure, undermined the rebels' capacity to sustain prolonged campaigns. By 757 CE, these combined efforts succeeded in recapturing both Chang'an and Luoyang, marking a symbolic and strategic turning point. While the capital's recovery reinstated imperial authority and offered a measure of psychological reassurance to the populace, it also revealed emerging structural realities. The Tang's reliance on foreign military support exposed vulnerabilities in internal security, and the growing autonomy of regional commanders underscored the limits of central control. The necessity of leveraging external alliances highlighted the interconnectedness of Eurasian powers and demonstrated how imperial survival increasingly depended on both domestic administration and strategic international engagement. The successful counteroffensive stabilized the dynasty temporarily, but it did not end the rebellion. The prolonged conflict continued to strain the Tang economy, depopulate northern regions, and reshape the balance of authority within the military and bureaucracy. These long-term administrative, demographic, and social consequences form the focus of the subsequent section, emphasizing how the empire emerged changed by the very forces that had initially threatened its survival. The Lushan Rebellion, which persisted in various forms until 763 CE, inflicted profound and lasting damage on the Tang dynasty, reshaping the empire's social, economic, and administrative foundations. The widespread conflict resulted in catastrophic population losses, particularly in the northern plains, where entire communities were displaced or destroyed. Agricultural collapse followed, as farmlands were abandoned, irrigation systems neglected, and transport networks disrupted. These disruptions undermined the fiscal base of the empire, making tax collection increasingly unreliable and limiting the central government's capacity to fund military, administrative, or public works projects. The previously effective equal field system, which had ensured equitable land distribution and stable revenues, could no longer operate reliably, leaving the state dependent on ad hoc arrangements and local authorities for resource extraction. Administratively, the rebellion permanently altered the balance of power between the central court and regional commanders. To suppress the uprising, the Tang had granted extraordinary authority to certain judushi, empowering them to raise troops, collect taxes, and govern autonomously. Although these powers had been essential for wartime expediency, their retention after the conflict created semi-independent regional regimes that limited the dynasty's central authority. Over time, these commanders increasingly acted as de facto rulers in their territories, fundamentally transforming Tang governance from a centralized imperial system into a federated structure with strong local military elites. Culturally, the rebellion left an imprint on literature, art, and intellectual life. Poets such as Du Fu reflected the era's trauma, portraying themes of displacement, social disorder, and personal suffering, marking a shift from the confident, expansive expression of the early Tang to a tone characterized by reflection and lamentation. The societal memory of instability influenced governance, social attitudes, and elite consciousness, reinforcing the importance of prudence, loyalty, and local power structures. Despite surviving the rebellion, the Tang dynasty emerged significantly weakened. The combination of demographic loss, economic disruption, and entrenched regional autonomy permanently altered the empire's capacity for centralized rule. The dynasty's subsequent history would be defined by the challenge of rebuilding authority, adapting to a fragmented political landscape, and maintaining cultural and administrative cohesion in a fundamentally transformed imperial structure. During the Tang dynasty's peak, the central government exemplified a level of administrative sophistication that supported both territorial expansion and societal cohesion. At the heart of this system was the 3 departments and 6 ministries framework, which divided state functions into distinct but interlocking branches. The Secretariat, or Zhongshushang, was responsible for drafting and proposing imperial policy, translating the emperor's directives into actionable proposals. The Chancellery, or Minxiashang, functioned as a supervisory body, reviewing, amending, or vetoing proposals to ensure alignment with legal and ethical standards. Finally, the Department of State Affairs, or Shangshushang, managed the execution of approved policies, overseeing taxation, law enforcement, military logistics, and civil administration across the empire's vast territories. This separation of policymaking, oversight, and implementation created a system of checks and balances that minimized errors, prevented concentration of authority, and enabled swift, coordinated action throughout the state. The civil service examination system further reinforced Tang bureaucratic professionalism. Initially limited in scope, examinations gradually expanded during the 7th and 8th centuries, incorporating Confucian classics, law, and administrative principles. This meritocratic approach allowed individuals of modest backgrounds to enter the bureaucracy, gradually reducing the dominance of hereditary aristocratic elites. Prominent officials such as Zhang Jiuling, celebrated for his literary skill and ethical integrity, and Yao Chong, noted for his administrative acumen and pragmatic reform policies, exemplified the blend of Confucian moral guidance and operational competence that shaped Tang governance. Their careers demonstrated how bureaucratic roles were informed not only by technical knowledge, but also by ethical responsibility, emphasizing the importance of service to the state and public welfare. This professionalized bureaucracy enabled the Tang government to manage a rapidly growing population, coordinate taxation systems, oversee large-scale infrastructure projects such as the Grand Canal, and maintain effective frontier administration. By institutionalizing meritocracy and integrating ethical principles into decision-making, the Tang created a governance model that balanced centralized authority with administrative efficiency, laying the foundation for subsequent dynastic empires. The refinement of bureaucratic structures, coupled with merit-based recruitment and ethical oversight, allowed the Tang to organize society on a scale unmatched in pre-modern history. These administrative principles not only maintained internal stability, but also facilitated the coordination of resources and human capital, setting the stage for a detailed examination of Tang's social order, demographic distribution, and everyday life in the empire. At the height of Tang China, the empire supported a population estimated at over 50 million, distributed across a complex social hierarchy that combined traditional elites with emerging meritocratic structures. At the apex were imperial relatives and hereditary nobility, whose status conferred privileges in administration, land ownership, and ceremonial precedence. Scholar officials, recruited increasingly through the civil service examination system, held influential bureaucratic and judicial positions, bridging the gap between hereditary aristocracy and common citizens. Commoners formed the backbone of agrarian production, while artisans, merchants, and specialized laborers supported urban economies and trade networks. Marginalized groups, including some frontier peoples and former slaves, occupied less secure social positions, though Tang policies often permitted mobility based on talent, achievement, or service, creating relative fluidity compared with earlier dynasties. Household registers and tax documents provide a window into the scale and composition of Tang populations, revealing patterns of migration, urbanization, and family organization that underpin the empire's administrative capacity. Daily life in both countryside and urban centers was highly structured yet dynamic. In rural areas, extended families managed agricultural plots under the equal field system, coordinated seasonal labor, and adhered to Confucian norms regarding hierarchy, filial piety, and community responsibilities. Clothing and diet reflected social status: coarse hemp garments for peasants, fine silk for officials, and diverse cuisines in cities enriched by trade. Chang'an and Luoyang, with their planned streets, bustling markets, and vibrant entertainment districts, served as hubs of cosmopolitan life, integrating foreign merchants, envoys, and entertainers from Sogdian, Persian, Korean, and Japanese backgrounds. Archaeological finds, including imported ceramics, musical instruments, and inscriptions, attest to the cultural hybridity and openness that characterized Tang urban centers. Education and literacy were increasingly valued, with children of literate households learning Confucian texts, calligraphy, and administrative techniques. Gender roles were defined but nuanced. Elite women could exercise influence through family networks and patronage, while common women participated actively in domestic and agricultural labor. The interplay between urban cosmopolitanism and rural traditions created a society capable of absorbing population growth, accommodating migration, and maintaining cohesion despite increasing ethnic and cultural diversity. This vibrant and stratified social fabric underpinned Tang China's ability to mobilize resources and talent effectively, supporting an expansive economy and a dynamic cultural life. The stability and complexity of daily life thus directly enabled the commercial, agricultural, and fiscal systems explored in the following section on Tang economic power. The economic strength of Tang China during its zenith rested on a combination of innovative land management, agricultural expansion, and far-reaching trade networks that together created one of the most productive pre-modern economies in the world. Central to this system was the equal field system, or Juntian, which allocated land to households based on size and labor capacity. This arrangement prevented the excessive concentration of land in the hands of aristocratic elites, maintained a reliable rural tax base, and ensured that corvée labor and military conscription obligations could be met. Household registers, meticulously maintained by local administrators, allowed the central government to monitor population movements and land allocations, creating a direct link between agrarian output and state revenue. Agricultural productivity benefited from technological and organizational improvements. The use of iron plows, enhanced irrigation systems, and crop diversification, including the introduction of fast-growing rice varieties in southern regions, expanded the cultivable area and increased yields. The Yellow River Basin remained a critical breadbasket, while the Yangtze Delta and southern provinces emerged as increasingly productive economic zones, providing surplus grain to feed growing urban populations and supply the capital's extensive markets. Domestic trade flourished alongside agricultural growth. Urban centers such as Chang'an, Luoyang, and Yangzhou served as hubs for regulated markets where merchants, artisans, and transport operators facilitated the circulation of goods, ranging from silk and tea to metalwork and ceramics. Beyond the domestic sphere, the Tang capitalized on the Silk Road and maritime routes, establishing trade links that brought spices, precious metals, glassware, and exotic animals into Chinese markets. Records indicate active foreign merchant communities, including Sogdians, Persians, and Koreans, who operated with imperial oversight and contributed to both economic diversity and diplomatic exchange. This economic framework underpinned Tang military campaigns, supported the lavish patronage of art, literature, and education, and funded the extensive bureaucratic apparatus. It also allowed the empire to absorb population growth and respond to internal and external pressures with greater resilience than previous dynasties. The combination of equitable land distribution, technological innovation, and integrated trade networks explains why Tang China achieved sustained prosperity and administrative capacity. Economic stability and fiscal resources directly enabled the development of a formidable military system, a topic explored in the next section, which examines Tang military organization, frontier strategy, and imperial defense capabilities. At its height, the Tang military represented a sophisticated synthesis of institutional organization, strategic planning, and frontier diplomacy. Central to the Tang defense apparatus was the phubbing militia system, a form of conscription in which local households provided part-time soldiers who alternated between agricultural labor and military service. Under this arrangement, young men received land allotments in exchange for military duty, creating a self-sustaining structure that combined agrarian productivity with troop readiness. Units were strategically stationed near critical frontier commanderies, allowing for rapid mobilization without overburdening the central treasury. As the empire expanded, the limitations of part-time service became apparent, prompting the gradual transition toward professional, salaried armies capable of sustained campaigns over greater distances and against increasingly complex threats. The Tang relied on an extensive network of frontier commands and military installations. Garrisons were established along key strategic corridors, particularly in the Darien Basin, the northern steppes, and the borders of Central Asia, enabling the empire to monitor trade routes, secure the Silk Road, and respond swiftly to incursions by nomadic groups. Military governors, or jidushi, exercised considerable authority over these regions, overseeing troop recruitment, logistics, taxation, and local administration. While initially a practical response to frontier challenges, the concentration of military power in the hands of regional commanders increasingly allowed them to exercise quasi-autonomous political authority, creating long-term structural tensions between central and regional control. Tang military policy was notable for its flexibility and inclusiveness. Frontier forces integrated soldiers of diverse ethnic backgrounds, tribal allies, and specialized cavalry units, reflecting the empire's cosmopolitan composition and the practical necessities of defending varied terrains. Diplomatic arrangements with nomadic neighbors, including marriage alliances, tribute exchanges, and negotiated settlements, complemented military strength, ensuring a balance between coercion and cooperation. This combination of strategy, logistics, and integration allowed the Tang to project power across deserts, mountains, and steppe corridors, maintaining both territorial integrity and political influence. While the military system provided security and facilitated expansion, the empowerment of regional commanders and the complexity of frontier management also introduced long-term vulnerabilities. The growing autonomy of jidushi foreshadowed challenges in central control, illustrating how military success and administrative flexibility could generate conditions for political decentralization. This dynamic naturally connects to the next section, which examines administrative reforms designed to manage the empire's expanding population, territory, and resources more effectively. During the Tang Dynasty's middle period, the provincial system evolved from a strictly administrative mechanism into a complex network of semi-autonomous regional authorities, reflecting both the empire's territorial expansion and the practical demands of frontier management. Central to this system were the judushi, or military governors, originally appointed to secure volatile borderlands and maintain rapid response forces against external threats. These officials exercised control over garrison troops, coordinated local logistics, and managed defensive infrastructure, ensuring that the empire could respond efficiently to incursions by nomadic groups or rebellious elements. Archaeological inscriptions and surviving administrative documents indicate that judushi also oversaw tax collection, local adjudication, and public works, effectively combining civil and military responsibilities in a single office. As the empire expanded and the demands of frontier governance intensified, the authority of these provincial governors grew. In addition to their military roles, judushi began managing substantial fiscal resources and controlling recruitment, giving them leverage over both local populations and central government appointments. Figures such as An Lushan exemplify the trajectory of this system. Initially a loyal regional commander, he leveraged his accumulated military and administrative powers to challenge imperial authority, demonstrating how the combination of local autonomy and strategic positioning could yield unprecedented influence. Despite this concentration of power, the central government retained oversight through formal reporting structures, seasonal inspections, and ceremonial reaffirmation of appointments. For several decades, this balance allowed the Tang to maintain both frontier security and political stability. The rise of judushi illustrates the inherent tension between efficiency and control. While their powers enhanced rapid mobilization and administrative flexibility, they also created structural vulnerabilities by decentralizing authority in ways that could, and eventually would, be exploited during periods of political instability. This duality was particularly significant because the Tang relied heavily on frontier commanders to manage ethnically diverse populations, oversee distant resources, and implement complex military strategies, embedding both resilience and latent fragility into the empire's governance. Understanding the expansion of provincial authority clarifies why the Tang system, though effective for much of its height, contained the seeds of future crises. These developments set the stage for internal and external pressures converging in the mid-8th century, culminating in the An Lushan Rebellion, a pivotal event that dramatically reshaped the trajectory of Tang political and military structures, explored in the next chapter. In the mid-8th century, the Tang dynasty stood at a paradoxical point of prosperity and vulnerability. Under Emperor Xuanzong, the empire had achieved unprecedented cultural, economic, and administrative heights, with flourishing poetry, expansive trade networks, and a disciplined bureaucracy. Yet beneath this surface of stability, the political framework was increasingly strained. Court factions, personal networks, and regional military authorities began exerting influence in ways that gradually eroded central control. The most visible manifestation of these tensions was the prominence of the Yang family. Consort Yang Yuhuan, one of Xuanzong's favored concubines, and her cousin Yang Guozhong wielded extraordinary influence over appointments, policy decisions, and imperial favor, often to the detriment of seasoned ministerial advice. Historical memorials document repeated concerns raised by officials regarding nepotism, corruption, and the displacement of experienced bureaucrats, signaling a growing divergence between meritocratic ideals and personal patronage. Simultaneously, the Tang court faced the complexities of managing an increasingly militarized frontier. Regional commanders, or judushi, were essential to securing borders and defending trade routes, particularly along the northern steppes and in the northeast provinces. Among these, An Lushan emerged as a figure of remarkable capability and ambition. He commanded multiple prefectures, maintained extensive troop contingents, and cultivated personal ties with the emperor and the Yang family. While these alliances provided short-term security and loyalty, they also granted him substantial autonomy, including the authority to recruit troops, levy taxes, and manage local administration with limited oversight. The tensions between civilian ministers advocating central control and military figures commanding local loyalty reflected structural contradictions in Tang governance. Factional disputes among scholar officials, eunuchs, and court favorites further destabilized the administration. Conflicting priorities over taxation, appointments, and frontier policy led to inconsistent directives, undermining effective coordination and fostering resentment among regional leaders. Documents from the period reveal repeated warnings about Lushan's growing power, yet personal alliances and imperial indulgence delayed decisive action. These conditions illustrate a fundamental vulnerability. The dynasty's institutional stability could be overshadowed by court intrigue and personal networks, leaving the central government exposed to challenges from within its own military structure. By mapping these intersecting pressures, factionalism, military autonomy, and patronage networks, this period reveals how a seemingly prosperous and well-administered state could accumulate the internal weaknesses that precipitated one of the most significant upheavals in Chinese history. These simmering tensions set the stage for open conflict, leading directly to Lushan's dramatic decision to revolt and the outbreak of the rebellion itself, which will be examined in the following section. In late 755, the Tang Dynasty faced a crisis that would irrevocably alter its political and social landscape. Lushan, a highly placed military commander with authority over multiple northern prefectures, initiated a revolt against the imperial court, citing grievances over perceived persecution and the corruption of central officials. His accusations resonated among frontier troops, many of whom were drawn from diverse ethnic backgrounds, including Sogdian, Turkic, and Han soldiers. These multi-ethnic forces reflected the Tang military's frontier system, which, while effective in territorial defense and rapid mobilization, also created conditions for localized power bases capable of challenging imperial authority. Lushan's advance was remarkably swift. Utilizing strategic positions along the northern corridors and the Grand Canal, he secured logistical advantages that enabled rapid troop movements and reliable supply lines. His forces captured Luoyang, the eastern capital, with minimal resistance, and he proclaimed himself emperor of a new Yin dynasty. Contemporary accounts emphasize the confusion within the Tang court, where underestimation of the threat, delays in communication, and factional disagreements undermined a coordinated military response. In the north, local commanders faced divided loyalties, further weakening the empire's initial defensive capacity. The rebellion demonstrated how frontier military structures, originally intended to protect the empire, could be redirected as instruments of internal power. Lushan skillfully exploited dissatisfaction over provincial autonomy, heavy taxation, and court corruption to recruit support, transforming what might have been a limited mutiny into a major civil war. This mobilization illustrates both the strengths and vulnerabilities inherent in the Tang's administrative and military design, efficient for rapid response yet prone to exploitation when central authority faltered. By the end of 755, the Tang dynasty had lost control over its eastern territories, and the political center was imperiled. The rapid territorial gains of the rebels forced the court into emergency measures, including the relocation of the emperor and his retinue, signaling a dramatic collapse of centralized power. These initial events set the stage for the subsequent flight of Emperor Xuanzong and the rise of his son, Emperor Suzong, marking a critical juncture in the empire's struggle to survive amid unprecedented internal upheaval. By mid-756, the Tang dynasty confronted a crisis of unparalleled severity as Lushan's forces advanced rapidly toward the heart of the empire. Chang'an, the eastern capital and symbolic center of Tang authority, became increasingly indefensible. Emperor Xuanzong, recognizing the imminent threat, orchestrated the evacuation of the imperial court, relocating the emperor, his family, and a substantial contingent of officials and military personnel westward toward the relative safety of the Sichuan Basin. Contemporary records describe the logistical complexity of moving thousands of court members, attendants, and supplies across difficult terrain, a task complicated by seasonal weather, limited transport infrastructure, and the urgency imposed by the rebel advance. The population of Chang'an and surrounding provinces witnessed the flight of the emperor, interpreting it as both a practical necessity and a dramatic signal of imperial vulnerability. Amid this turmoil, tensions within the court reached a breaking point. Yang Guozhong, whose influence and prior mismanagement had fueled factional resentment, was executed by imperial order in an attempt to stabilize the remaining military forces. Simultaneously, the famous consort Yang Yuhuan, implicated by association with her family's political ascendancy, was compelled to take her own life under pressure from loyalist troops at Maui. These actions illustrate how the Tang leadership sought to reassert control and preserve morale, yet they also reveal the extent to which desperation reshaped the norms of imperial decision-making. While Xuanzong withdrew to the western provinces, his son Li Heng established a parallel seat of power in Lingwu, proclaiming himself Emperor Suzong. This duality created a fragmented authority structure. Xuanzong, the senior emperor, nominally retained ceremonial status, while Suzong exercised practical command over loyalist forces and military strategy. This arrangement, though improvised, enabled continuity of imperial legitimacy at a moment when the dynasty's symbolic and administrative cohesion was under extreme strain. The evacuation and emergency measures fundamentally transformed the political landscape, converting the rebellion from a military incursion into a profound crisis of dynastic legitimacy. It highlighted both the vulnerabilities inherent in centralized authority and the capacity for adaptive leadership under extreme pressure. With the Tang leadership dispersed and the capital occupied, the dynasty's survival depended increasingly on forming strategic alliances, reorganizing loyalist forces, and mobilizing unconventional strategies, developments that would define the subsequent counteroffensive against the Yin rebellion. By 756, following the catastrophic fall of Chang'an and Luoyang to Lushan's rebel forces, the Tang court under Emperor Suzong faced the urgent task of reversing the rebellion's momentum. Suzong's approach combined domestic military reorganization with strategic diplomacy, reflecting a pragmatic understanding of both the empire's limitations and the opportunities presented by external allies. Central to this effort was the coordination with regional generals who retained loyal forces in frontier commanderies, most notably Guizhi and Li Guangbi. These commanders implemented strict discipline, restored supply lines, and mobilized local militias to create cohesive defensive formations, demonstrating how decentralized military power could be harnessed effectively under central oversight. Simultaneously, Suzong pursued an alliance with the Uyghur Khaganate, whose cavalry expertise and mobility proved decisive in the recapture of northern territories. Diplomatic negotiations involved concessions, including trade privileges and marriage alliances, underscoring the complex interdependence between the agrarian Tang state and the steppe nomads. Uyghur forces participated in major engagements around Luoyang and Chang'an, providing critical reinforcement, though historical records and archaeological findings indicate that their involvement entailed looting and political leverage, illustrating the risks inherent in relying on foreign troops. Through careful timing, coordination of loyalist contingents, and judicious use of available resources, Tang forces gradually regained control of the capitals by 757 to 758. The campaign exemplified the effective integration of domestic administrative capacity with external military support, highlighting both the adaptability and vulnerabilities of the Tang state. The reclamation of Chang'an and Luoyang restored symbolic legitimacy to the dynasty, reaffirming the emperor's authority in the eyes of both the populace and bureaucratic institutions. However, the victory was partial. The rebellion persisted in regional strongholds, and the underlying structural weaknesses, autonomous military governors, fractured loyalties, and economic disruption, remained unresolved. The recapture of the capitals marked a turning point, demonstrating the potential of coalition warfare and strategic alliances, but it also foreshadowed the prolonged instability and political recalibration that would define the final decades of mid-Tang governance. This recovery phase set the stage for examining the broader consequences of the Lushan rebellion on the Tang state, society, and administrative structures. The Lushan rebellion, though ultimately quelled, produced consequences that permanently transformed the Tang political landscape. The prolonged conflict devastated northern China, particularly along the Yellow River Basin, where centuries of agrarian development were interrupted by depopulation, abandoned fields, and disrupted irrigation systems. The equal field system, once the backbone of Tang fiscal stability, collapsed in the face of population displacement and loss of accurate land registers. Without a reliable tax base, the central government struggled to maintain revenue collection, undermining both administrative capacity and military funding. Militarily, the rebellion accelerated the shift from the phubbing militia system to professionalized armies under the command of regional judushi. These military governors, originally intended as frontier managers, gained substantial autonomy by necessity, controlling both finances and troops in their circuits. Historical records and administrative documents indicate that even after the capitals were restored, the central court could rarely impose authority directly over these commanders, establishing a precedent of decentralized military power that would influence Tang politics for the remainder of the dynasty. The court itself underwent structural changes as eunuchs assumed unprecedented influence. Tasked with managing communications, palace security, and elite military units, eunuchs became essential intermediaries between the emperor and regional forces. Their growing power introduced new dynamics of factionalism and patronage, as well as a parallel channel of authority capable of shaping succession and appointments. Fiscal adjustments, including new forms of taxation and revenue collection, attempted to stabilize the state, but they could not fully restore the pre-rebellion economic equilibrium. Culturally and administratively, the rebellion produced a more cautious, risk-averse governance style, prioritizing survival over expansion. The dynasty transitioned from the cohesion of High Tang to a late Tang period characterized by fragmentation, regional autonomy, and complex factional politics. This evolution illustrates how even a suppressed rebellion can alter the underlying balance of power within an empire, reshaping civil-military relations, bureaucratic oversight, and political legitimacy. The Tang state that emerged was durable yet fundamentally transformed, setting the trajectory for subsequent political decentralization, social adaptation, and regional realignment. The post-rebellion Tang thus entered an era where decentralization, evolving power structures, and cultural adaptation defined both opportunity and constraint, providing the context for the late Tang developments examined in the following chapter. In the decades following the Lushan rebellion, the Tang dynasty faced the formidable challenge of reconstructing a state whose fiscal, administrative, and demographic foundations had been severely disrupted. The most pressing concern was revenue collection, as the collapse of the equal field system had left the government without a reliable method to assess and tax agrarian production. By the late 8th century, land had increasingly concentrated in the hands of wealthy elites, monasteries, and powerful local families, while population displacement and depopulated regions further complicated traditional tax registers. To address these challenges, Chancellor Yang Yin implemented the two-tax system in 780 CE. This system calculated taxes based on the wealth and property of households rather than rigid land allotments, reflecting a pragmatic adaptation to the post-rebellion realities of Tang society. By shifting the fiscal emphasis from land to accessible assets, the government sought to stabilize revenue streams while accommodating the new social and economic landscape. Administrative adjustments accompanied these fiscal reforms. The courts sought to standardize provincial ranks, enforce clearer lines of accountability, and strengthen oversight of officials who had previously operated with substantial autonomy. Efforts were made to rehabilitate transportation and communication networks, particularly canals and roadways essential for grain shipments to Chang'an and Luoyang. Irrigation systems, vital for agricultural productivity, were repaired in depopulated northern and central regions, and the state encouraged migration to resettle devastated areas, restoring both labor supply and local governance structures. These initiatives reflect the Tang leadership's dual focus on restoring economic efficiency and reinforcing administrative capacity. Despite these achievements, the reforms faced inherent limitations. Regional military governors, or jidushi, retained de facto authority over their circuits, commanding armies, taxation, and local administration independently of the central court. While the two-tax system increased fiscal predictability and improved the central treasury, it could not overcome entrenched local autonomy or fully reassert the Tang's pre-rebellion political cohesion. The period demonstrates a striking tension between institutional reform and structural decentralization, illustrating the challenges of governing an empire fractured by both war and long-term social change. The Tang state's capacity for fiscal and administrative modernization was therefore only partially successful. While the government achieved a more sustainable revenue model and strengthened bureaucratic procedures, the shifting balance of power toward regional authorities set the stage for the continuing political fragmentation and factionalism that would characterize the late Tang era. This transition toward decentralized authority frames the next examination of regional power dynamics and imperial struggle. In the aftermath of the Lushan Rebellion, Tang China experienced a marked shift in the distribution of military and political power. Central authority, weakened by prolonged conflict and population loss, increasingly depended on regional commanders, jidushi, who were originally appointed to manage frontier defenses. Over time, these military governors consolidated control over local resources, armies, and taxation, effectively becoming semi-autonomous rulers within the empire. Historical maps and administrative records show that regions such as Hebei in the north and the lower Yangtze in the south began to develop distinct political identities, with their jidushi exercising authority that rivaled, and sometimes contradicted, the central government. Prominent figures exemplify this transformation. Li Baoqian in Hebei, Tian Yu in Huainan, and Wang Wujuan in Fanyang illustrate how jidushi established hereditary succession, turning military offices into quasi-dynastic fiefdoms. Their loyalty to the Tang court was pragmatic, contingent on recognition, titles, and rewards, rather than stemming from institutional allegiance. While the imperial court attempted negotiation, co-optation, and occasional punitive expeditions, these measures often succeeded only temporarily, highlighting the limitations of central power over the increasingly independent regional authorities. The evolution of jidushi autonomy reshaped Tang political structure. Imperial decrees, once the ultimate source of governance, were frequently mediated through personal relationships, marriage alliances, or financial inducements to military governors. As a result, the dynasty became reliant on a delicate web of loyalties, where the cohesion of the state rested less on institutional hierarchy and more on the careful management of regional power holders. This decentralization had profound long-term consequences. By empowering jidushi, the Tang inadvertently created a system in which local military leaders could challenge central authority, dictate succession, and negotiate directly with foreign states, undermining the integrated command that had characterized the High Tang era. The court's inability to fully rein in these regional powers not only exposed the dynasty to internal fragmentation, but also reshaped imperial politics, creating an environment in which palace factions and eunuchs increasingly emerged as alternative centers of influence. The rise of autonomous regional militaries thus set the stage for a new political reality in late Tang China, where central weakness forced the dynasty to rely on internal palace dynamics and unconventional sources of control, a theme explored in the next section. During the late Tang period, eunuchs transformed from palace servants into pivotal political actors, exerting unprecedented influence over both court and military affairs. Traditionally confined to managing inner palace duties, eunuchs increasingly commanded the Shin's army, the elite imperial guard responsible for protecting the emperor. Control over this force provided eunuchs with the ability to enforce loyalty, intimidate rivals, and intervene directly in succession disputes, effectively positioning them as kingmakers within the palace. Their access to imperial authority allowed them to mediate between the throne and other powerful actors, including regional jidushi, bureaucrats, and consort families. Key figures illustrate the scope and consequences of eunuch power. Yu Chang'an, a prominent court eunuch under Emperor Dizong, leveraged his influence to manipulate appointments and policy decisions, while Tian Lingzi during the reign of Emperor Shizong exercised de facto control over succession and administrative appointments. These examples reveal how eunuchs could advance personal and factional interests, often at odds with civil officials or regional commanders, while maintaining the appearance of loyalty to the dynasty. The reliance on eunuchs arose from practical concerns. As central authority weakened and Jidushi gained autonomy, emperors increasingly depended on palace insiders to safeguard the throne and manage communications. Eunuchs were seen as reliable intermediaries, untethered to regional power bases, able to enforce imperial will within the capital. However, this dependency had profound risks. Eunuch intervention exacerbated factionalism, intensified court intrigue, and sometimes paralyzed decision-making, especially when their priorities conflicted with broader governance goals. Thus, eunuchs evolved from functional palace staff into a structural element of Tang politics, capable of shaping imperial policy, succession, and military enforcement. Their ascendancy underscores the paradox of late Tang governance. While central authority nominally persisted, power was often exercised through intermediaries whose interests could diverge sharply from those of the emperor or state. The growing influence of palace eunuchs set the stage for a late Tang characterized by both administrative fragility and political maneuvering. Even as cultural life continued to thrive, a juxtaposition explored in the subsequent section on art, literature, and intellectual life. During the late Tang period, China witnessed an extraordinary flourishing of culture and intellectual life, even as political cohesion eroded. Poets such as Li Shangyin, Du Mu, and Wen Tingyun exemplified this era, producing works that blended personal emotion, social observation, and subtle political commentary. Their poetry often employed ornate diction, metaphor, and allegory to navigate a court environment rife with factional tension and censorship. These literary innovations not only reflected the anxieties of their age, but also expanded the expressive possibilities of classical Chinese poetry, leaving a lasting influence on subsequent generations. Beyond literature, the late Tang saw notable achievements in painting, sculpture, and religious scholarship. Buddhist and Taoist practices continued to inspire philosophical discourse and artistic production, while urban centers like Chang'an remained hubs of international exchange, hosting merchants, envoys, and scholars from across Eurasia. Surviving murals, temple complexes, and manuscripts reveal a vibrant aesthetic sensibility, combining technical refinement with cosmopolitan influences drawn from Central Asia, Persia, and the Korean Peninsula. The paradox of the late Tang is striking. Cultural innovation thrived amid political fragmentation. Artists, poets, and scholars responded to uncertainty by developing complex forms of expression, creating works that resonated with both elite and broader audiences. This resilience demonstrates how intellectual and artistic activity can flourish even when formal institutions falter. Why did Tang culture continue to innovate even as the empire's political foundations grew increasingly fragile? Yet, while artistic achievement persisted, unresolved structural and political pressures ultimately escalated into violent conflicts, setting the stage for the late Tang's terminal crises explored in the next chapter. The Huang Chao Rebellion, 874 to 884, represents one of the most destructive crises in late Tang history, signaling the accelerating collapse of imperial authority. Triggered by widespread economic distress, heavy taxation, and natural disasters, the rebellion reflected deep-seated social grievances. Huang Chao, a former examination candidate turned insurgent, capitalized on popular discontent, rallying peasants, salt smugglers, and marginalized groups into a formidable force that swept across northern and central China. The uprising's trajectory was marked by the capture of key cities, most notably Chang'an, and the systematic destruction of economic infrastructure, administrative centers, and cultural sites. The Tang court, constrained by the autonomy of regional Jidushi and interference from palace eunuchs, struggled to coordinate a coherent defense. Multiple factions within the military and civil administration competed for influence, further hampering the dynasty's ability to respond effectively. Although Tang forces eventually suppressed Huang Chao, the rebellion's consequences were catastrophic. Massive depopulation, the collapse of the remaining fiscal base, and entrenched regional autonomy left the central government unable to reassert meaningful control. The episode accelerated the fragmentation of the empire, deepened social and economic instability, and exposed the limits of a dynasty already weakened by decades of decentralization and prior rebellions. How did a rebellion fueled by economic desperation inflict irreparable damage on an empire already weakened by internal fragmentation? By the late 9th century, the Tang Dynasty faced systemic collapse, setting the stage for the final chapters exploring the dynasty's disintegration and enduring legacy in Chinese history. This section examines the terminal phase of Tang political decline, highlighting the profound decentralization of authority that characterized the late 9th century. After decades of cumulative crises, including the Lushan and Huang Chao rebellions, the central government struggled to assert control over strategic provinces. Military governors, or jidushi, who had originally been appointed to defend the empire's frontiers, had transformed into semi-autonomous warlords. These regional powers collected taxes independently, raised private armies, and administered justice without meaningful oversight from Chang'an. Prominent figures such as Zhu Wan, a former rebel leader who later seized power in Hunan, and Li Qiang, the Shadow Turkic general controlling parts of Shaanxi and Hebei, illustrate the scale of provincial autonomy. By the dynasty's end, the emperor's authority was largely ceremonial. Imperial edicts were often ignored, and palace politics became a theater for eunuchs and factional officials whose influence could no longer shape substantive governance. The narrative situates this fragmentation as both a consequence and a continuation of earlier institutional decisions. The phubbing system's decline, the empowerment of jidushi during military crises, and the court's reliance on eunuchs for palace security all contributed to a structural imbalance between central and provincial power. This imbalance eroded the legitimacy and practical authority of the emperor, leaving the Tang state incapable of enforcing coherent policy or defending against internal and external threats. How did centuries of reliance on regional military governors ultimately accelerate the collapse of imperial authority? The weakening of central control, combined with persistent social and economic pressures, created fertile ground for coups, rebellions, and the rise of warlords, conditions that set the stage for the final disintegration of the Tang dynasty. This section examines the economic dimensions of Tang decline, highlighting how fiscal mismanagement, environmental pressures, and social strain converged to undermine imperial stability. Decades of warfare, including the Lushan and Huang Chao rebellions, combined with floods, droughts, and declining soil fertility to reduce agricultural output. The two-tax system, 780 CE, designed to replace the collapsed equal field system, provided only partial relief. While it streamlined revenue collection on paper, local officials often overassessed households, creating heavy burdens on peasants and smallholders. The narrative details how these pressures triggered widespread unrest. Banditry increased along trade routes, rural uprisings flared across northern and central China, and formerly integrated markets fractured. The Huang Chao Rebellion, 874 to 884, is highlighted as the culmination of fiscal mismanagement, environmental stress, and social grievance. A movement led by peasants and disenfranchised urban residents that captured major cities, including Chang'an, and caused unprecedented economic destruction. Even after military suppression, local economies struggled to recover, with depopulated regions, destroyed infrastructure, and disrupted trade networks compounding the empire's vulnerability. By examining the links between fiscal failure and political fragmentation, the section underscores how Tang China's economic foundations, once central to the dynasty's power, became a critical weakness in its final decades. Agricultural instability and inequitable taxation eroded popular support for the court, weakened regional loyalty, and heightened dependence on increasingly autonomous jidushi. How could an empire that once achieved remarkable economic integration collapse under the weight of its own fiscal and social pressures? The intensifying economic crisis compounded military and administrative weaknesses, setting the stage for the political and social fragmentation that ultimately led to the Tang Dynasty's final disintegration. This section examines the internal political turmoil that accelerated the Tang Dynasty's decline, focusing on the rise of eunuch power, factionalism, and rapid imperial turnover. Eunuchs, who controlled the Shin's armies and had direct access to the emperor, increasingly influenced appointments, promotions, and policy decisions. Their authority often superseded that of civil officials and regional governors, creating a governance system where personal loyalty and palace favor mattered more than merit or institutional hierarchy. The narrative details a series of palace coups, assassinations, and forced abdications that characterized the late Tang court. Emperors were frequently manipulated, replaced, or executed as eunuchs jockeyed for influence, undermining the continuity of central leadership. These internal conflicts eroded the legitimacy of the throne and impaired the government's ability to respond to crises, whether from rebellious governors, local uprisings, or external threats. Contemporary chronicles depict emperors as largely symbolic figures, with real authority concentrated in palace insiders who acted independently of formal bureaucratic structures. By highlighting the unchecked power of eunuchs, the section illustrates how internal palace politics compounded existing structural weaknesses, weakening coordination between central and provincial authorities and accelerating administrative fragmentation. This erosion of effective governance left the dynasty increasingly dependent on regional military powers while diminishing the capacity for cohesive policy or fiscal management. Why did palace politics, rather than battlefield defeats, play a decisive role in the Tang dynasty's final decline? With palace factions dominating imperial decision-making and regional warlords asserting autonomy, the final decades of Tang authority became defined by fragmentation, setting the stage for the emergence of successor states and the eventual end of the dynasty. This section explores the final phase of Tang disintegration, highlighting how central authority fractured into autonomous regional domains before the official end of the dynasty in 907 CE. Zhu I, a former rebel general, emerges as the pivotal figure in this transition. Exploiting the weakened central government and factional infighting, he forced the last Tang emperor, Ai of Tang, to abdicate, founding the later Liang dynasty and inaugurating the Five Dynasties and Ten Kingdoms period, a time defined by fragmented regional rule and short-lived dynastic changes. The narrative details how many Jadushi retained their autonomous control over provinces, exercising military, fiscal, and administrative authority independently of the central court. Local economies adapted to these decentralized conditions, often reorganizing under regional administrations that provided continuity for taxation, defense, and social order despite the collapse of imperial oversight. Cultural and religious institutions survived, but the overarching coordination that had defined Tang governance, including integrated taxation, frontier defense, and civil service oversight, had effectively dissolved. This section underscores that the dynasty's fall was not sudden but the cumulative outcome of centuries of structural pressures, the empowerment of regional military governors, repeated reliance on palace eunuchs, recurring fiscal crises, and recurring rebellions that undermined both central authority and popular confidence. The Tang's sophisticated bureaucratic and military institutions, which had once sustained one of the largest and most integrated empires in pre-modern history, were ultimately unable to adapt to the centrifugal forces that had been building for generations. How did centuries of administrative sophistication ultimately give way to fragmentation, allowing warlords to replace emperors as the primary rulers of China? With Tang authority formally ended, the documentary can now examine the dynasty's enduring political, cultural, and intellectual legacy, highlighting how its innovations continued to influence China and East Asia long after its fall. The Tang dynasty, despite its political turbulence and eventual decline, remains unparalleled in Chinese cultural history, producing a flowering of artistic and literary achievement that set enduring standards. Tang poetry reached its pinnacle during this period, with poets such as Li Bai, Du Fu, Wang Wei, and Bai Juyi exemplifying the era's intellectual and aesthetic richness. Li Bai's verse celebrated freedom, friendship, and the natural world, often exploring the tension between worldly responsibilities and personal expression. Du Fu, in contrast, chronicled societal hardships, offering moral reflection on war, famine, and governance. Wang Wei merged Buddhist philosophy with poetic imagery, crafting works that harmonized visual and literary art. Bai Juyi addressed social inequities, blending literary elegance with accessibility, highlighting the concerns of everyday citizens and reflecting the era's cosmopolitan spirit. Tang visual arts thrived alongside literature. Landscape painting evolved into a dominant genre, emphasizing harmony between humans and nature and reflecting philosophical ideals. Buddhist sculptures and murals, many influenced by Central and South Asian traditions via the Silk Road, proliferated across temples, signifying both religious devotion and cross-cultural exchange. Court music, theater, and dance reached unprecedented sophistication, incorporating foreign melodies and instruments that enriched ceremonial and entertainment practices. Urban centers such as Chang'an and Luoyang became hubs of creative interaction, where artists, literati, and performers contributed to a vibrant cosmopolitan culture. The influence of Tang culture extended far beyond its political lifespan. Poetic forms, painting techniques, and musical repertoires influenced successive dynasties, including Song, Yuan, Ming, and Qing. Tang innovations spread across East Asia, shaping Japanese, Korean, and Vietnamese literature and art. The era's cosmopolitanism, characterized by foreign artistic motifs, Silk Road facilitated exchanges, and tolerance for diverse religious and philosophical thought, created a model of cultural dynamism in pre-modern societies. Even amid political instability, Tang poets, painters, and musicians produced works that offered social reflection, philosophical inquiry, and aesthetic innovation. Their enduring legacy demonstrates how cultural brilliance can not only survive but flourish during periods of imperial upheaval. The Tang dynasty's contributions to governance were as transformative as its cultural achievements. Central to Tang statecraft was the refinement of the 3 departments and 6 ministries system, which established a professional bureaucracy capable of managing a vast empire. The Secretariat formulated policy, the Chancellery reviewed and advised on legislation, and the Department of State Affairs executed administrative decisions. This division of labor created clarity in responsibilities, checks on power, and mechanisms for accountability that strengthened central authority. Complementing this institutional framework was the civil service examination system, which expanded under Tang rule. By emphasizing meritocratic principles, the exams allowed talented individuals from non-aristocratic families to rise to positions of influence, curbing hereditary privilege and enhancing administrative efficiency. Confucian ethical training guided decision-making, ensuring that officials were not only competent but morally grounded. Key figures exemplified how literati expertise shaped policymaking, legal administration, and fiscal oversight. The Tang also innovated in taxation, population registration, and legal codification. Standardized census records enabled accurate tax collection, while equitable land policies ensured economic resources supported the state without overly burdening subjects. Tang legal codes, meticulously documented and systematized, provided a model of procedural fairness and governance that informed later dynasties. These administrative innovations demonstrated adaptability, allowing the state to manage a rapidly growing population, oversee complex trade networks, and maintain order across diverse provinces. Even during periods of fragmentation, Tang bureaucratic principles guided local governance and informed military administration. The dynasty's administrative model had profound long-term influence. Subsequent Chinese dynasties, from Song to Qing, built upon Tang innovations rather than reinventing governance structures. Beyond China, Tang bureaucracy influenced Korea's unified Silla and Japan's Nara period, where civil service principles, legal codes, and court rituals were explicitly adapted. The Tang Dynasty's prosperity rested on a foundation of economic sophistication. Agricultural innovation, effective taxation, and expansive trade networks made China one of the most commercially integrated societies of the pre-modern world. The equal field system initially allocated land according to household labor capacity, ensuring equitable distribution and consistent tax revenue. While later crises reduced its effectiveness, this policy established the principles of agrarian stability that informed fiscal planning for centuries. Improvements in irrigation, iron tools, and crop diversification, particularly in the Yellow River Basin and southern rice-producing regions, drove population growth and urban expansion. Trade and transport were central to Tang economic influence. The Grand Canal facilitated efficient movement of grain and goods from the Yangtze to the northern capitals, supporting both the army and administrative centers. Overland, the Tang capitalized on the Silk Road, connecting China to Central Asia, Persia, and beyond. Maritime networks linked the empire to Southeast Asia, India, and the Arabian Peninsula, allowing Tang merchants to participate in a vibrant cross-cultural commercial sphere. Urban markets, especially in Chang'an and Luoyang, became hubs of economic exchange, attracting foreign merchants, artisans, and diplomats. Tang fiscal policies strengthened economic resilience. Land redistribution, regulated marketplaces, and taxation reforms encouraged agricultural productivity and trade participation. Surpluses financed military campaigns, cultural patronage, and administrative expansion, demonstrating the interdependence of economic and state power. The Tang model influenced successive dynasties, notably the Song, whose commercial sophistication built upon Tang-era precedents. Through trade and fiscal innovation, Tang China emerged as the economic center of Eurasia, exerting influence not only domestically but across the wider region. Silk, tea, ceramics, and other goods flowed outward, while foreign currencies, technologies, and ideas entered Chinese markets. These exchanges fostered cultural, religious, and technological diffusion, laying the groundwork for centuries of interconnected Eurasian commerce. Tang China's innovations in governance, culture, and religion resonated far beyond its borders. Through diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange, Tang institutions and ideas shaped the political and intellectual development of Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and Central Asia. In Japan, the Nara and Heian courts adopted Tang-style legal codes, centralized bureaucracy, and literary conventions, emulating Chinese court culture in governance, poetry, and ceremony. Korean kingdoms similarly implemented Tang-inspired administrative structures, Confucian education, and military organization. Tang cosmopolitanism facilitated cross-cultural diffusion of religion and philosophy. Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucian thought traveled along trade routes and were adopted, adapted, and transmitted by neighboring states. Monasteries and temples in Central Asia became sites of exchange where Tang artistic, literary, and religious styles mingled with local traditions, creating lasting hybrid forms of visual and intellectual culture. Tang officials, merchants, and envoys acted as vectors of knowledge and cultural norms, ensuring that Chinese statecraft and aesthetics left enduring imprints throughout the region. This influence extended to art, literature, and urban design. Tang-style architecture, painting motifs, and poetic forms became part of the cultural vocabulary in East Asia, shaping regional elite education and courtly tastes. Diplomatic exchanges, including marriages, tributary missions, and scholar envoys, reinforced these networks, embedding Tang ideals into the structures of neighboring polities. The Tang dynasty's legacy endures because it combined political innovation, cultural brilliance, and economic sophistication in ways that set lasting standards. Politically, Tang's centralization, bureaucratic rigor, and legal codification demonstrated both the potential and limits of imperial authority. The dynasty's successes and failures provide a case study in managing a vast, diverse empire, balancing central power with regional autonomy, and navigating institutional resilience and fragility. Culturally, Tang literature, painting, sculpture, and music achieved unparalleled refinement. Poetic forms codified aesthetic principles, while landscape and religious art synthesized domestic and foreign influences. The dynasty's cultural achievements informed subsequent eras of Chinese history and shaped the literary and artistic traditions of East Asia. Tang cosmopolitanism facilitated cross-cultural exchange, integrating ideas, technologies, and art across borders. Economically, the Tang established models of agricultural management, taxation, trade, and urban planning that guided later dynasties. The integration of rural and urban production, combined with expansive overland and maritime trade networks, enabled the empire to sustain both administrative complexity and cultural patronage. The dynasty's story is one of contrasts, extraordinary achievements alongside vulnerability, innovation alongside fragility, prosperity alongside political crises. Its rise and fall illustrate the interplay of centralization and decentralization, cultural flourishing and political instability, and the enduring impact of administrative design. Tang achievements provide modern historians and policymakers with lessons in governance, cultural investment, and statecraft. They demonstrate how institutions, commerce, and creativity can coalesce to produce enduring influence, even beyond the political lifespan of an empire. The Tang Dynasty remains a benchmark for evaluating the integration of culture, governance, and economic strategy in human civilization.